All right, so we're recording this session so everybody can see it. I've got the chat box up, and we're going to move forward. So today I'm going to talk to you specifically about organizing your speech. So those of you who are in my class, we've had some experience organizing speeches. What do you kind of think of in general? And I'll be watching the chat box. The way that I run GoTo meetings is I will ask you guys questions throughout, and then you're going to hear a big pause. Usually it's because I'm looking at the chat box waiting for you guys to respond. So the sooner you guys respond to my questions, the more quickly we are going to get through this lecture. Haha. Forcing participation. But, so what do you guys think of? What do you think of when you think about organizing a speech? How about you, David? What do you think of? What do you think of? I can adjust the question. What do you guys think of when you think about organizing an essay? Awesome, Jose. Putting all of your ideas together. Great. Dakota says, point for point, what is going to be talked about and in what order. Very good. Ordering your information. Taking those ideas, putting them together, putting them in an order that makes sense. And that's what we're talking about today. And specifically, we're talking about the structure of a speech. So we've got this basic organization pattern. So when you're thinking about that 3.5 essay, what do you guys think about? What do you think about when you think about that really basic order? I'm not looking for a lot. It's kind of like 3 points. What do you think? You guys are chatty today, huh? All right. So we're moving on to that basic organization pattern. Awesome, Jose. Thank you. An introduction, a body, and a conclusion. And that's what we're going to talk about today. In general, that's kind of what we want to see in a speech as well. The difference between writing an essay and writing a speech is that we get to be a little bit more overt, a little bit more clear about what we are cueing the audience in to listen for. So first, we're going to talk about how to create an introduction. So in this class, we're looking for a very specific order for your introduction. Now, does this mean that in every speech that you do ever in your life, you will follow these main points? No, not necessarily. But it does mean that these are points that are important for you to include, important for you to address. So first we've got this introduction, and an introduction will consist of an attention getter. And the attention getter, we sometimes think about that as an open with impact. We've got to connect with audience, and that has two components that you want to think about. We've got a thesis statement, that's your main idea that you're trying to get across, the focus of your information in your speech. And then we've got that preview statement, kind of that a look at the table of contents for what's to come. So first we've got open with impact. And here's the way that I like to do this. And if you guys, I'd love it if you played along with me. We have a number of open with impacts that are coming out and that are going to come up on the slides. And I can read them out loud to all of you. And that's, I mean, I do have an awesome voice, but sometimes I get tired of hearing myself talk. I would love it if you guys would read these out loud instead of me. So for the first one, it's an example of humor, and it's Arnold Schwarzenegger. So do any of you have an awesome Arnold Schwarzenegger impression? Dakota, I bet you have an amazing Arnold Schwarzenegger impression, right? No way. William, you don't either? All right, well, I need somebody to volunteer to read this next slide. Arnold Schwarzenegger impression or not. So what you'll want to do is you'll want to unmute your microphone to do this.
I'll give it a shot.
Can you speak up a little bit? I can't quite hear you.
Okay, did anybody else volunteer?
Jose, it looks like it's you.
Okay, I can try. Hold on.
Thanks.
Thank you very much. Thank you. What, what greetings? What's a greeting? Wow. I guess I'm seeing that right. Like a winning an Oscar, as if I would know. Speaking of acting, one of my movies was called True Lies, and that's the Democrats should have called their convention.
That was amazing. Thank you so much. Awesome job. Okay, so now you can mute your mic again, Jose. So when we're looking at this, this is an example of how we can use humor for an introduction to a speech. And the thing that I want to point out with this is a real introduction that Arnold Schwarzenegger used in one of his speeches. What do you guys think? Go ahead and write it in the chat box. What do you think was the purpose of this event? Why was everybody gathered today? Why did why was Arnold Schwarzenegger speaking in the first place? Okay, thanks, Dakota. He was talking to speak about politics. Absolutely. Because he won. Sure. Yeah. And so he's talking to what's his audience consist of? Who? Who does his audience consist of? Who is sitting in those seats? How can we characterize them? Okay, so they're going to be supporters, right? So if we look at this introduction, it's funny, but it's funny to a very specific audience, right? So Arnold Schwarzenegger was part of the Republican Party, so he is referencing himself. There's a little bit of self-deprecation there, and there's also he's referencing the Democratic convention and what those other guys might say. Okay, so it's humor, but it's specific to the event. It is specific to the audience, and it's ramping us into what we're going to talk about. Because if he's giving a speech, probably the reason he's giving a speech is to talk about how excellent the Republican Party is. And excellence sometimes can happen in contrast. Okay, so this is serving as a ramp. Moving forward, so we can also open with a metaphor. Okay, so we've got this next one. I will need somebody to read this. Jose read the last one and he was incredible. So we need somebody to live up to that. Dakota, you've been participatory, so you're probably up.
All right. Is there like a specific tone you want me to
Oh no,
speak
pick your
this in?
favorite.
All right. So I'm not really good at that. So it says, it is a point to remember that all of the ironies about Diana, perhaps the greatest is this, that a girl given the name of the ancient goddess of hunting was in the end the most hunted person of the modern age.
Awesome. Thanks, Dakota. You can go ahead and mute your mic. So when we're
Sweet.
looking at this, we've got a metaphor. So you guys in the chat box, or you can unmute your mic and talk to me, either way. What does this metaphor cause you to do when you hear this said out loud? What does your brain start to do? Let's see, who else is here? Arturo, what does your brain start to do? All right, who else is there? David Milada, what does your brain start to do when you hear the metaphor? Thanks, Dakota. It makes you compare. Okay, awesome, Dakota. So we're comparing how Diana and a Greek god or Roman goddess would be Comparable. Yeah, absolutely. And even on a more basic level, you're starting to think about this topic, right? You're starting to think about Diana. You're starting to think about this Greek goddess. We are generating thought. So, what an Open with Impact does is it gets your audience to start to generate thought on your topic. And the thought can come in a lot of different ways, right? So, the metaphor often gets us to see images, see pictures. Humor gets us to think about the other guys, or it gets us to think about the specific event that was funny. Sometimes it'll get us to ask questions. So we're going to keep moving forward. Okay, we can also open with a shocking statement. So we've had Dakota read and we've had Jose read. Joseph, are you there? Joseph, would you unmute your mic and go ahead and read this out loud? All right, Joseph Adams. No, David Milande? How do I say that? David, can you read this out loud? All right, I guess I get to read it out loud. Cool. Shocking statement. The piracy of music is not a private offense. It hurts everyone by diminishing the incentive to invest in the creation of music. And this was spoken by Hillary Rosen during the Senate hearing for the RIAA. So when we think about shocking statements, shock happens within a context, right? So shock happens when we are expecting something else, something that we don't anticipate hearing. We also can have an unusual statement. So here's an unusual statement by Baz Luhrmann. Baz Luhrmann said, "Ladies and gentlemen of the class of 99, wear sunscreen. If I could offer you only one tip for the future, sunscreen would be it. The long-term benefits of sunscreen have been proved by scientists, whereas the rest of my advice has no more basis, more reliable than my own meandering experience. I will dispense this advice now. Enjoy the power and beauty of your youth. Never mind. You will not understand the power and beauty of your youth until they have faded. But trust me, in 20 years you will look back on photos of yourself and recall in a way you can't grasp now how much possibility lay before you and how fabulous you really looked." All right. So when we're looking at this, this is unusual. Why? Dakota and Jose, you guys are the ones who are paying attention. So why? And so when we think about why, we want to think about the context. So like, what is the context of this speech? The context might be, okay, right. Jose says that it doesn't match. Okay, so that's a good point, but what doesn't it match, Jose? How does sunscreen work for school? Okay, yeah. So when we're thinking about, this is like a commencement speech, right? So when we're thinking about a commencement speech, what do we expect to hear? We expect to hear your tips for success. Work really hard. Go find your fortune. You've all graduated and you're incredible. Yes, thanks, William. Exactly. But we don't hear that. The first thing that he says is wear sunscreen. We can prove that. I'm not an expert on life. I'm an expert on, I was alive. There's some things that I did. Maybe it'll work for you. So the reason we are dissecting these is because they're getting us to do some specific things. An unusual statement gets us to do what? It makes us go, huh? It makes us say, why are they saying that? What are we going to talk about next? So this gets us to ask questions. Getting your audience to ask questions about where we're going is a good ramp into your topic. All right, we can also start with a rhetorical question. So I'm going to read this rhetorical question out loud, and then I want you to tell me exactly what happens in your brain after I read this. What does your brain try to do? All right. Isn't it a bit unnerving that doctors call what they do practice? All right, Dakota and William and Jose, what does your brain start to do immediately when I ask a question? Awesome, Dakota. You're starting to think. You're intrigued, you're thinking, and you try to answer the question. And you freeze. Yeah, so we're trying to answer the question, or it might go into an oh no. I don't know. Am I supposed to answer that? So your brain starts to generate questions. So what have we got? We're generating images with metaphor. We're generating questions with shocking statements or unusual statements. We're generating answers with rhetorical questions. We're thinking about the other guys or thinking about the joke, our specific experience when we're looking at humor. So each of these open with impacts, there's a pattern. We can also start with a quote. I'm going to let you guys read this quote for yourselves. I think it's a really interesting quote. One of the things that I want to point out is the reason that we include quotes in any speech, especially if we're starting out with something, if we're considering it to be poignant. The quote doesn't exist in a vacuum. Quotes don't exist by themselves. Notice how this quote is phrased. And this was phrased by Steve Marks of the General Counsel for the RIAA. He doesn't say the quote first. He says Karl Kraus first. And then, because probably you're thinking, who the heck is Karl Kraus? He tells us who that person is, an Austrian writer. This is an example of verbal citation. So, Karl Kraus, an Austrian writer, when? During the 20th century. He's completely qualified. We know who this person is. And then he continues on to say the quote. The reason we use quotes is not just because the words work, but also because the person who said them is considered somebody who could be an expert on the topic, who could have some insight, who might be some philosopher. The person is important. So if you open with a quote, and I really recommend that you guys try opening with a quote, it's an awesome way to start, make sure that you qualify. Make sure that you give us that verbal citation and sort it in the way that we're looking at right here. Karl Kraus, an Austrian writer during the 20th century. The person's name, qualify that person, and then say what they said. Now, we also have the option to open with a story. I will read the story out loud for you guys, and I want you to tell me what's going on in your experience, in your brain, in your gut, whatever, okay? So listen to this really carefully. At Winston Churchill's funeral, there was a moment when the coffin was to be carried out of Westminster Abbey and onto a barge for a trip up the Thames River. A special group of pallbearers from various military services in Great Britain was selected for this. One, a sailor, broke his ankle carrying the coffin down the stone steps of the Abbey, and for a moment it seemed that the coffin would drop to the ground, but it was safely carried onto the barge. Afterward, officials said to the sailor, "How did you manage to go on?" And the sailor said, "I would have carried him all over London." That's the way I feel about my friend Daryl Zanuck. So that is the opening to a eulogy that was spoken by Orson Welles. But William and Jose and Dakota, what were you thinking? Jose, you're thinking about honor. Did you have any other response besides thoughts? This story usually gets me kind of emotionally involved. It kind of hits me in my gut. It seems heartfelt. So we've got these feelings of pride, honor. So when we think about an open with impact, we can get our audience to generate a picture. We can get them to answer a question. We can get them to ask questions about our topic. And we can get them emotionally involved. So a good open with impact, no matter what option you choose, it's going to do one of those four things. Yeah, thanks, William. It really gets them to see how important it was to that speaker. And here's another option. We've got a statistic. So this statistic says 49% of the US population saw Titanic in theaters. We can always open with a statistic. And that fits along with the opening. That can be a shocking statement. Statistics work as shocking statements. That can be maybe something unusual. A lot of times statistics can get us to ask questions. So those of you in chat world, what are 3 open with impacts that we've covered? Anybody remember? As a quick review, what have we got? Oh, and Dakota says, was the statistic in relation to the time when it was released or to today's population? I think that was the time that it was released. Thanks, Dakota. Oh, sorry, curiosity. Oh, absolutely. That's okay, William. It's an old movie at this point. So we've got metaphor. That's one way to open with impact. Yes. How else? Well, an open with impact is an attention getter. So that's what we're talking about. I'm sorry, I tend to use those words interchangeably. And I understand how that could be confusing. So an attention getter, we've got a quotation. So we've got metaphor, we've got quotation. What else? One more, and I'll move on. And we can open with humor. Thanks, Dakota. All right, so now that we understand how to open with impact, how to use an attention getter, we want to move on to the thesis. When we're having a thesis statement, we want it to be clear, concise, supportable. We want it to be easy to remember. So those of you guys in chat world, I have a question for you. When you are listening to a song, what is the part of the song that you remember? Yeah, a thesis statement, a really good thesis statement is hard to put together. And thanks, William. Oh, I'm going to sneeze, guys. Phew! Excuse me. Okay, so you're going to, thank you. William says, bless you. All right, so we've got the hook. We remember the hook. And the reason we remember the hook is what? Do you guys know? We hear it repeated over and over. And thanks, Dakota, it's also really catchy. Okay, so we want a thesis statement to be clear, concise, supportable, easy to remember. When our audience walks away, this is what we want them to know. When somebody says, what did the speaker talk about? You want them to be able to say some variation of your thesis statement. And so in order for that to happen, it really needs to be clear, needs to be easy for them to remember, but also you need to be able to support it. Because it's something that you are going to repeat throughout your speech. We're going to talk about this concept of repetition. When we're thinking about supporting our thesis statement, we want to think about our main points. So if we're thinking about your thesis statement as the top of a stool, I want you to think about your main points as the 3 legs that are going to hold this thing up. Now, if one of those legs isn't quite as strong, that stool is going to be crooked. So we want to be able to evenly support your thesis statement with your main points. So a good way to test a thesis statement is if you can choose some main points that you feel are very clear. If the main points, if you're having trouble finding your main points, then maybe you need to revise your thesis statement. You see, this tends to be a process of test and tweak and test and tweak. So we're talking about main points. When you are selecting main points, there are a couple questions that you want to consider, a couple factors. Usually I choose to talk about concepts that I think are awesome. So those of you guys in chat world, when you are selecting a topic that you think is awesome, how much do you usually know about that topic? And after you answer that question, how much do you know about that? You know a lot, right, Dakota? And so the next question would be, how long could you talk about that topic if people would let you go? Forever. Hours. Okay, so somewhere between hours and the rest of my life. Okay, so what happens is if I think that everything is important, I'm not necessarily going to be a good judge for what my audience wants to hear. So what we want to do is we want to keep in mind what our audience wants to hear. Let me rephrase that. If I think that everything is important, sometimes it's hard for me in the concept of my own brain to figure out what is the most important. So we put in the filter of audience. What does your audience need to know? And what do they need to know based on your thesis statement? So we're looking at the goal of the speech, and then what are the basic things that your audience is going to need to know to be able to walk away, restate your thesis statement, and then give some good supporting points. So when we're talking about that, each main point needs to relate to your specific purpose. So if it's an informative speech, these need to be points that give us information. If it's a persuasive speech, they need to be points that support that level of persuasion. What's going to be useful and what's going to be interesting. So I could know everything about the monarch butterfly. I could know its social habits. I could know what monarchs eat. I could know, mating habits, behavior, what flowers they like. So if I'm talking to a bunch of botanists, I may not want to talk about the mating habits of butterflies, even though I might think that they're really cool. I'm going to focus on the information that is important to my audience. So specifically, how these butterflies, how these monarchs interact with the fauna, floral flowers, plants, stuff like that. So what is our audience going to find useful, and what is our audience going to find interesting? It all comes down to being an audience-focused speaker. Think about them, because you are the reason that they're there, right? Or they are the reason that you're there. It's a symbiotic relationship. It works. We're working together. So we also want to think about transitions. And guys, by the way, if you have any questions, please let me know. It's much more fun to have a conversation than it is for me to just keep talking. Dakota, thanks. You don't want to bore your audience, and you want to get them into what you're speaking. That's a really amazing point, Dakota. Thank you. Absolutely. So we have to be audience focused. So keeping on the same page as being audience focused, there are some structures. There's a way to organize your speech that helps your audience, stay on track with you. My voice is getting fuzzy. And B, remember what you're saying. We're going to talk about this concept of repetition. And so when we're talking about what people remember, we're talking about primacy and we're talking about recency. So people remember the first thing they hear. They remember the last thing they hear. And they also remember things that have been repeated throughout. So the tools that we have as speakers, we know that they're going to remember the first thing, the last thing, and the things that we say repeatedly. Transitions are a way to give us a recap and kind of reconnect those dots. If you've got a dot here, that's your main point one, and a dot here, main point two. A transition takes us from here to here, and it tells your audience why it makes sense that we're moving in this direction. So it's a sentence indicating that you are moving from one part of your speech to the next. We're connecting those dots. Dakota, a speech isn't an essay. You can't jump around from one point to the next without including, yeah, absolutely, Dakota. Because, so let's think about, we're going to take a pause. Sometimes I take tangents. I apologize. Think about the difference between reading information and hearing information. So think about how many of you zone out when you are reading information or hearing information. Does anybody have that experience? I mean, I know that I do. So what happens when you zone out when you're reading? What do you have the ability to do? Okay. Yeah. And some of us don't zone out when we're reading. I zone out when I'm reading. And if you zone out, you can jump back. So you have an opportunity to rewind, go back and look at what we were talking about. Oh, so what was I reading? Oh, yeah, now it makes sense. Okay, I'm back on track. Now, if you're listening to somebody speak, what do you do when you zone out as an audience member? What happens to that information that you lost? Are you ever going to get it back? Maybe. I mean, if you have the opportunity to ask questions, right? But it's probably gone. Mm-hmm. So your job as a speaker is to understand the audience's experience. And their experience is that sometimes we zone out. Sometimes we want to get back on the train. Transitions are a place for you to give them that leg up. Okay? So a transition is a sentence. We're going from one here, we're going from here to there. We just talked about X. Now I want to tell you about Y, and X and Y have a lot in common. So, for example, we just talked about cats. Cats are really fuzzy, and they love to sit in your lap. Now I want to talk about dogs. Dogs like to sit in your lap, but boxers are not the best lap dogs. Let's talk about dogs. Right. We're connecting. It keeps us focused too. That's a really great point, Dakota. Thanks. So it's keeping us focused on the topic. So another thing we want to think about is signposts. So signposts, these are words, they're phrases within sentences that help you structure, that help your audience understand the speech's structure. So can anybody think of signposts that we use, that we listen for, that mean a lot? And by mean a lot, I kind of mean, like, how do I know when a speech is almost done? What words might clue me into the speech is almost done? They start to wrap up. It's in conclusion, in summary. This is what we talked about. Stuff like that. Okay, so how do I know that we've transitioned from one point to another point? So we're changing focus within the body of the speech. What are some words that cue us into this focus has changed? What are some words that cue us into this is the focus of this entire speech? It's nice to give your audience a feel of movement. Signposts also cue us into things that your audience might be listening for, right? So, according to. When we hear the phrase according to, then we are listening for something, right? We're listening for a citation. We're listening for something that somebody else said. And that's a good thing for us to hear because it means the information isn't all coming from the speaker. It means our speaker has done a little bit of research. We also have to preview my main ideas. So to preview my main ideas, that means we've got a table of contents coming up. This is the roadmap that we're going to talk about today. In summary, we already got that. In summary and conclusion, very good, Jose and Dakota. So if we're thinking about main points, we're moving. Okay, so one cause, another cause, the main cause. So you see how we can have some sort of repetition even within the phrasing of our main points. Again, we're going back to that word repetition because when we create patterns, that so patterns aren't necessarily good within vocal delivery, but patterns are really good within information delivery. So where can we create a pattern that's easy to follow? And one way is to have some of these words, right? So we're going to move on from main points in theory to how do we support those main points. So we started out with a thesis, and then we moved to main points, those stool legs. Now we are going to look at how we actually construct those legs of the stool, right? What building materials go into making a really strong main point. And this comes down to your supporting information. When we're thinking about supporting information, we're going to go back all the way to the Greek days with Aristotle, and we're thinking about ethos and pathos and logos. Okay, does anybody remember what ethos is? You probably talked about this in your English class a really long time ago. Jose, Dakota, William? Ethos. How about pathos? Anybody remember pathos, logos, any of these guys? No clue. Oh, hi, Tanika. It's good to see you. Yep. And that's okay. So the reason we go the reason we go back to these the reason we go back to the things that Aristotle said is because we find that they're relevant. And what's really exciting about these things being relevant is that they were discovered a really long time ago. I think it kind of goes into this concept of human beings have a way that we think. So when we're thinking about ethos, pathos, and logos, ethos is establishing your credibility as a speaker and establishing that you are fair. Yes, absolutely. Thanks, Joseph. It's about relating something to character. Right, so it's establishing that you're a fair speaker, that you're a credible source for this information, that you're trustworthy, and stuff like that. So ethos, in a speech, if I'm going to be considered a source for information, how could I establish ethos? What are the bits of information I can include that would tell people that I had done my research, that would tell people that I was considering this information fairly, that would tell people how I feel about the topic? You guys can answer my question anytime. What do you think? Okay, so if we're listening to people, one of the things we look for is what's your experience with this topic, right? What is your experience? Have you actually done this? Awesome. Thanks, Tanika. Life experience. Yeah. Okay. So also, have you talked to other people who do this, or are we just listening to what you're going to say? Oh, you did your research. Okay. So source citations. And not just any old source citations, but a diverse representation of sources, right? And are those sources credible? So A, sources, B, the credibility of your sources, C, your personal experience on a topic and your opinion about it, and C, are you on the same page as your audience? Do you understand who you're talking to? So these are the components of ethos. Your research, as in the source of your research, your personal perspective and experience, and your how you are tuned into your audience. So we're going to move on to pathos. Pathos would be emotional involvement. How can we get our audience emotionally involved in a topic? Does anybody have tactics for getting people emotionally involved in things? Or have you seen commercials that got you emotionally involved? Or have you watched movies that got you emotionally involved? What are the things that they do that make that happen? Anybody know? So sad stories. So sad stories will get us emotionally involved. They get us on that empathetic track. But it'll also any story, right? Stories give us a journey from one to another to another. It gives us a mental picture. It makes it relatable. Excellent, Tanika. Right. So anytime we can give our audience a mental picture, we can get them emotionally involved with a story, with an example. We can show them how it plays out, with a picture. Actual pictures sometimes say a lot more about the emotional feelings that are going on, than even just a than even just words, right? Okay, and then personal stories. Absolutely, Joseph. Personal stories are huge. And one of the things I want to point out with a personal story, it makes things really specific, right? Usually, we've got some really specific details that go along with a personal story. And also, you're accessing ethos, right? If I've got a personal story, I have personal experience. I'm a credible source. And also, I had feelings and troubles at the same time that I'm going to relate to you in a very specific way. Okay, we've got ethos, we've got pathos. Moving on to logos. Logos is essential. Logos talks about the logical sequence of your argument. And it also talks about doing actual research, including actual statistics, including actual facts. So is your argument fair? Is it logical? Do the sequences that you point out actually make sense? And is there data to back it up? So logos is about making sense on a non-emotional level and giving me data to show me. And this comes down to your main points, your subpoints, and your supporting points. Every main point should include a little bit, probably one or two of these: ethos, pathos, logos. Support for your main points. So next, I'm going to show you a list of possible supporting things. And what I'd like to hear from you guys is, which of these appeal to logos? Which of these options for supporting information appeal to logos? So that would be logic, that would be data, that would be showing us how things make sense on a non-emotional level. Awesome, Tanika. Yeah, statistics. Statistics come from research. So people have done research, and then they have looked at the frequency that something has happened. That is a really logic-based process. Excellent. What else? What else in this list? So we have definitions, statistics, examples, illustrations, testimony, comparisons, contrasts, and quotes and paraphrasings. Comparisons! Yes, absolutely. When we're comparing something, we're making we're logically looking at this. I love the excitement. Thank you, Dakota. Dakota put comparisons in all caps, which I appreciated. Okay, so we've got comparisons. So we're taking this, we're comparing it to this, and we're making these connections in a logical fashion. Awesome. What else? Quotes. Hi, Rich. You're new. Good to see you. Okay, so when we're talking about quotes, quotes do a little bit of both. Although actually, I would stick quotes in ethos, Rich, because quotes are giving us the credibility of another person. So we're showing a little bit of research, but connecting a quote to a situation, that absolutely accesses logos. Thanks. So you'll see that some of these have a little bit of bleed over, right? And bleed over is okay. What's important is that we're being specific. I want to talk about definitions. Definitions are amazing. Using definitions. So when we're thinking about a definition, let's define it, right? So definitions, anytime we're explaining what a word or concept means, with another series of words that don't include the word being defined. Okay? So a definition puts everybody on the same page. It makes sure, even if we're talking to experts, a lot of times experts have different concepts of the same word. So go ahead and define it. It puts us all on the same page, and it's one way of getting you and your audience in sync. So today we're going to talk about definitions. For the purposes of right now, definitions refer to any time I tell you what a word means. Great. So we've defined it. It's a short little clip, and it gets us all in that same place. Statistics, definitely logic-based. But when we think about statistics, statistics usually come from research. Research usually has a story. So don't forget that research, numbers by themselves are awesome. Numbers plus story work together really well. Examples. So you can give me an abstract concept, and then you can tell us how it works. We're going to do that in a moment with examples of how a speech works. I've given you a whole bunch of concepts for how we're going to organize our speech. Next, I'm going to show you a real life example. Okay, we've got illustrations, testimony. Testimony, we see this a lot. Testimony is usually a personal story, but from a person other than the speaker, a person with actual experience. And we've got quotes and paraphrasing, contrasts. All of these are really excellent. So here is an example. A professor that we used to have, Heather Halter, she put together a speech when she was an undergrad, and this is how she opened with impact. We've got, the great filmmaker Mel Brooks once said, "Tragedy is when I cut my finger. Comedy is when you walk into an open sewer and die." So if I was going to categorize this open with impact, this is a quick review, which category would this fit into? Based on the lecture that we had earlier. Humor. It's definitely humor, Dakota, and it's even something more, oh, yay, you put in quote. Yes. Okay, so it's humor, but it's also a quote. And look at how she's phrased this quote. We know who this person is. It's a great filmmaker. Who is it specifically? It's Mel Brooks. And then the quote happens. Great. So that's a way to open with impact. So now we're going to talk about how to connect with your audience. So we've talked in general about the structure of an introduction. We've talked in general about the body of our speech, the thesis and the main points and how we choose those. So now, and we've talked about how to open with impact, going back to that introduction. Now we're talking about how to connect with our audience. And here is why we do this. When I connect with an audience, I'm appealing to ethos. I'm establishing credibility. I'm also establishing a common ground in a relationship. So I'm showing that Dakota says I'm transitioning well. Thanks, Dakota. Transitions, repetition, recaps. All right, so we're connecting with the audience, and we're establishing our credibility, and we're also establishing that common ground in relationship. Hey guys, I know where you're coming from. Or, hey, I know who you are, and this is the version of you that I'm appealing to right now. And it lets us, sometimes we can actually even appeal to the setting or the occasion. So the connect, it has a couple purposes. First, we've got that relationship. And the second is to show them why they care about what you are going to say. So this is important to me because I think it's cool. Let me tell you why you are going to value this information too. So the connect with audience is about showing your audience why what you're going to say is important to their lives. And you can be overt about this. That is okay. This is going back to those signposts, the words that we listen for. What are signposts that cue me in as a listener, as an audience member, that tell me that what the speaker is saying is important to them? I think that sentence made sense. What do you think? And it can be as simple as, this is important to you because. But let's look at an example of how this might play out. So Professor Halter put this together. As a student of film, I'm excited to speak to other film enthusiasts who also maintain a deep admiration for the work of Mel Brooks. Okay, so people out in chat box world, This is your time to get your fingers ready. So, what part of this tells the audience who they are? Why does the audience care? They care because they're students? Okay. So, students, as a general rule, might like film people. They're film enthusiasts. Great. So, we're moving on to a little bit more specific. They're not just students, they're students of film. They like to watch movies. And they probably have a little bit of a catalog, right? So, what I'm going to say next is going to be interesting to you as a film watcher, as a lover of films. But wait a moment, she had to establish her own personal credibility too, right? So who is she? We're looking at this quote. She tells us who she is. She tells us who we are and why we care. She's a student of film, so her relationship to the topic, and you see that this isn't super in depth, right? It's just a little bitty phrase. She's told us what her relationship to the topic is. She's not an expert in film necessarily. She's a student. And student implies a couple of things, right? I'm a student of film, and therefore I watch a lot of movies. I'm studying it. Maybe I know a little bit of theory behind it. I'm in the process of learning. Maybe I took a really good class. But I have a vested interest. So, what is your interest as a speaker? Why does your audience care? And lay it out step by step. And that's an example of a connect with audience. Now we're moving back to thesis and preview. So, a thesis and a preview. A thesis shows your audience how you will approach and develop your topic, and it gives them an intellectual roadmap. So, it's kind of like, have you ever walked somewhere with somebody and they knew exactly where they were going, and you had no idea where you were going? And at the same time, you guys are trying to have a conversation. So, what I find when that happens is I'm always watching the other person out of the corner of my eye. Because, you're walking down a sidewalk, there's not a lot of space, you're probably shoulder to shoulder already. And I watch that person out of the corner of my eye because I don't really want to bump into them, because that always feels a little bit awkward. I tend to have a level of awkward anyway, and we just don't have to maximize the situation, right? What I find is that when people actually tell me ahead of time where I'm going, it frees up a little bit of my brain space so I can focus on the conversation. So the people that I love to walk with are people who are like, hey, at this stop sign up here, we're going to take a right. Hey, when we get to that building that's red, we're going to take a left. And they tell you this information a little bit ahead of time so that we don't have to actually think about the entire time, where are we going? We've kind of laid out the map as we started. And so your favorite type of people, mine too, Dakota. Yeah, so this is the reason we give people a thesis and we give them a preview. Here's what we're going to focus on. This is the journey that I plan to take you on. Go ahead and start generating some thoughts. So here's an example of Professor Halter's thesis and preview. So she says, today I will show you how Mel Brooks' use of parody, pop culture references, and repeat casting make him one of the most successful spoof directors. Specifically, I will show you how these concepts in action through examining 3 of his films, Blazing Saddles, Spaceballs, Dracula, Dead and Loving It. Okay, so if we're going to look at this, where is she using signposts? Oh, slides you meant? I know, but this is a way that I can get you guys information and we can talk about it. We can look at it together. I know, Tanika said she was just kidding. No, I totally agree with you. But this way we can all look at the same words at the same time. Thanks. I will show you. So today, I will show you. And what does that clue us into? That's the focus of the entire thing, right? So what's the thesis statement for this? Because we've got two concepts bunched into one here. We've got a thesis and a preview. Where does the thesis statement end? Where does it begin? I would suggest that the thesis statement starts with today. We've got that signpost word. Today I will show you. And then it gives us a perspective. Mel Brooks' use of parody, pop culture references, repeat casting make him one of the most successful spoof directors. Absolutely. Directors is where it ends. Thanks. Yeah. Sorry, sometimes it's hard for me to talk and read your chats at the same time. Exactly. So today I will show you all the way through spoof directors. That's your thesis. That's the focus of this entire speech. And then the roadmap, the preview. Today I will show you these concepts in action through examining 3 of his films. Blazing Saddles, Spaceballs, Dracula Dead and Loving It. So what are the 3 main points? What are the titles of these 3 main points? What do you guys think? Absolutely, Dakota. It's Blazing Saddles, Spaceballs, and Dracula Dead and Loving It. Those are the 3 main points. Perfect. So we've got a roadmap. This is how we're going to cover these concepts. We're going to look at 3 movies. If you were to write out this introduction, this is what it would look like all together. And we're not going to spend a lot of time looking at it, but this is what this turns into. The great filmmaker Mel Brooks once said, "Tragedy is when I cut my finger. Comedy is when you walk into an open sewer and die." As a student of film, I'm excited to speak to other film enthusiasts who also maintain a deep admiration for the work of Mel Brooks. Today, I will show you how Mel Brooks' use of parody, pop culture references, and repeat casting make him one of the most successful spoof directors. Specifically, I will show you these concepts in action through examining 3 of his films: Blazing Saddles, Spaceballs, and Dracula Dead and Loving It. So that's how that introduction is going to sound when you put it all together. Okay, so we've got the introduction. We understand how to support our speech. Finally, I want to talk about how to close with impact. And we are about to wrap this up, guys. I see that it's been about an hour. In your conclusion, your closing with impact, we want to restate main points. We're using this concept of repetition. Tell us what you're going to tell us at the beginning. I know, right, Dakota? Dakota said it flew by. It's because you guys have been participating. Makes it much more fun. Okay, so we're going to restate those main points. Remind your people, your audience, what you said. Use this repetition. Now, I'm not saying tell us verbatim what you said. That gets a little bit meh. That's not so fun. But paraphrase it. How can you say the things that you have already said in a different way? Maybe in a way that kind of makes it wrap together, something like that. So you want to restate your goal. What's the goal of your speech? And you're restating your main points. So here is a way that Professor Halter put this together. Through examining the 3 works, reading is hard today. Through examining 3 of Brooks' works, I have shown you why he is a master of spoof comedy. You'll be able to see him in action when he appears in the TV show Laughingstock, which is currently in pre-production. So we've got a summary, right? Let's review those main points. Examining 3 of Brooks' works. That was our roadmap, right? And then this is what I showed you. He's a master of spoof comedy. We looked at these 3 things. I've shown you he's a master. That was our goal. Hopefully we have achieved that. And now we've got this closing statement. The closing statement is different from the closing summary. Closing summary just summarizes what happened. The closing statement kind of puts that period on the end of the concept. So for the purposes of Professor Halter, she said, you'll be able to see him in action. So here's an opportunity for further learning. If you thought this was cool, look at what else is coming up next. Tanika says, and it gives you something current to relate and look forward to. That's an amazing point. Yeah. So where can I go now? If what you told me really resonated with me, if I thought it was amazing, I'm going to want more information. So where do I go? Or what feeling do you want us to leave with? This is another place where people sometimes close with a quote. If there's a quote that you can end with that's going to tie it all together, that's what your closing statement is. So when we're looking at our closing with impact, we're not thinking about having a really huge paragraph, but there are 2 components. We're reminding people what we said, that use of repetition, primacy, and recency, and then we're giving them a place to go. All right, we're going to talk really, really quickly about outlining. My class, you guys have been doing a lot of outlines already. Those of you who are not in my class, I really strongly recommend using the Bedford St. Martin speech outliner. It walks you through every specific piece that we, as a public speaking team, what we are looking for within your speeches. So it's if you're having trouble structuring, if you are looking for a little bit of guidance there, that speech outliner is actually really awesome. And I'm not just saying that, I've actually had students come back and tell me, thank you for telling me to use this. So I recommend it. We're talking about outlining. So, excuse me, as speakers, the reason we use outlines is we want to speak extemporaneously. So if I write everything out verbatim, it's actually really hard for me to understand what core concepts I'm trying to cover because it all kind of gets lost in the mush of words. Also, the impulse that I have when I write everything out is I want to memorize things verbatim. That does you a disservice as a speaker because language tends to be more informal. It's less formal. And also, sometimes when we memorize things word for word, we also memorize the inflection that goes along with it. So it takes away some of our ability to interact with our audience through word choice, through story choice, and stuff like that. So if you look at this right now, and I understand it's a slide you meant, very sorry, but look at how we've got this. Introduction, and then we've got bullet points, right? A, B, C, D. And then we've got subpoints. You can have more than 2 subpoints. And we just write out the titles for things. I recommend not doing one word subpoints. I recommend writing out phrases. So instead of saying story, I would say the story about how my mom's cat ate her bird, which is really a true story. My mom has that story. Okay, so think about how you can focus what you're writing down so that when you look at it as a speaker, it kind of jogs your memory, because that's our goal, is we want our outline to jog our memory. So if you were doing this, there are some parts of this outline that I think represent what I'm looking for, and parts of the student outline that represent what I'm not looking for. So if you look at main point number 3, how a day in the life of a Guyanese person differs from an American. And so what this student wrote is family, school, work, daily routines. So family, school, and work, as a speaker, I don't necessarily know what parts I intend to cover there. So that leaves me at a little bit of a disservice. But when we get down to D, daily routine, Then she specifies a story. Story about Tina and her monkey Jack. Awesome. Now I understand what I'm looking for. So look at main point number 4. Family is extremely important. We've got a phrase. Mention friend who can name all 33 first cousins and 70 plus second cousins. Okay, so that's a story. Phrases, full phrases with a focus, are going to help you in your outline better than words will help you. Huh. I think this is not necessarily the slideshow I meant to go for. Interesting. Sorry, guys. All right, so do you guys have any questions? Any questions about how to organize information? Any questions about how to outline a speech? All right, so right now I'm going to give some questions for those people who are watching the archive. So those of you who are watching the archive, I have a couple questions for you, and we're going to base these on the lecture. My question for you is, question number 1, go ahead and list 3 ways that we can open with impact. Question number 2, when I am going for a thesis statement, what are the characteristics that characterize my thesis statement? And question number 3, what is the vocabulary word that would indicate that we are moving throughout a speech? What is the vocabulary word that we talked about that indicates to our audience where we are within the sequence of a speech? Okay, so now I'm going to say goodbye to our archive audience. You guys were, I am sure you were fantastic, even though I did not get to speak with you today. And I'm going to end the recording. So thanks for being here. All right, and so those of you who are still here, do you guys have any questions? Oh, Tanika, awesome. I am so glad. She says that the pair practice really helped work out the kinks. Yay. Those of you who aren't in my class, I recommend practicing with a classmate. I think it makes a huge difference. Tanika says it does too. Any other questions, guys? Questions about the assignments coming up? We've got this industry professional speech. William says you hate practice. Me too. Practice is hard.